This is going to be the last lecture until August, and the topic, luckily in English for you guys, is compassion. So I had a really good hook to begin talking about compassion. But it's very interesting because when I guess out there's a poster, right? And outside there's a poster, and I've seen many posters where they have like the Buddha or the Kuan Yin or any like deity, and to the left it says wisdom, and to the right it says compassion. So it's very interesting because compassion, when somebody thinks about the word like Buddhism, immediately the word compassion comes into mind. So the question is, what is compassion, right? Why is it considered like a major quality in Buddhism? And we can start out with, well, I wanted to start out with this interesting hook, which is this idea that you guys see, let's just say you see a kid, right? Little kid riding his bicycle, just learning how to ride his bicycle. Okay, kid riding his bicycle, just learning, so he doesn't know how to ride. He's wobbling, and then he falls, scrapes his knee, and starts to cry. What do you feel like doing at that very moment? You see a kid falling down, little baby kid falling down, scrapes his knee, doesn't know how to ride a bike, and he's crying in the middle of the street. Do you just walk past him, or do you come and help him, right? Another big example that they always say is this. Let's just say you're walking down the woods or the forest, and all of a sudden you hear a baby crying. And then you look and you see, oh, there's a baby that's in the middle of a lake, a little lake or a pool that's like drowning. What do? Right? And you guys already know what you do, because ultimately, compassion is like the fundamental, according to Buddhism anyway, the fundamental expression of human nature. You see somebody in need, you have this inner need to want to help them as well, right? And this is a big part of Buddhism within itself. Its actual definition is the sympathetic pity or concern for the sufferings and misfortunes of others. And so, compassion is huge, right? And, I mean, the Vietnamese word for it is the Bi, right? And then you guys have to ask, like, what's the emphasis? Why is that? And we have a deity, her name is Kuan Yin, or Wan Zam of that, she's the lady in the garden, you know that statue? Do you guys know, like, her history? She's the goddess of compassion, or like, they don't call it goddess, she's a bodhisattva, right? That's like one step below being a Buddha, right? One step below. Now, what are bodhisattvas? The people, very much like us, they're all people who like had the opportunity to become Buddhas, right? To become really enlightened. But they chose like to stay back so that they can help like relieve the suffering of other people, right? That's why like so many people pray to the statue of Kuan Yin, right? Or we call her an example of that. Because she's supposed to help. She is a deity of compassion. She listens to our, I guess, misfortunes or our sufferings, and she's basically present, and she's there to some extent help us out, okay? So there's lots of ideas of compassion, and so I just wanted to go through all of them. To some extent, like, we know what it is, right? And we practice it, but I wonder to what extent you guys are actively thinking, oh yeah, this is an act of compassion, or this is something that I can constantly engage in, right? Alright, so I want to add like a couple of definitions of what compassion is so that you guys have a clearer understanding of it. According to the book I'm reading, it says it's purified love, or it's like a kind of service offered out of selflessness and wisdom. It's actually really big that the wisdom part is there. Because sometimes, and this is a prelude to like the larger discussion, sometimes if you have compassion without wisdom, it's actually not compassion at all, okay? And the other idea of compassion is also like contributions made without expecting anything in return. So it's a combination of love, wisdom, generosity, and just helping the need to help others, okay? So, like, they gave us a very tricky example. So here's an example. There's this guy, he's in prison, right? And he's in prison precisely because he's destroyed property and he's hurt other people, right? And so, if you use compassion to forgive him, is that right or is it wrong? Here you have a man who's like, let's just say he burned houses and killed other people. But the idea of compassion says, you have to, you're supposed to be mindful of his sufferings and sympathetic to that. And that's a tricky question, right? How would Buddhism answer that question? I mean, the idea is this though. Like, you can't turn a blind eye to that type of behavior, right? That's like using compassion in the wrong way. And there's this story of like how in a jail, this guy was set to be executed. But none of the guards in the jail wanted to help execute him because they were saying, oh, I'm trying to be compassionate here. I can't like kill this man. So the warden of the prison had to call on like military officers to go execute the man. And it's kind of a tricky debate, right? Because like killing is bad no matter what. But it says like if you are letting him go, if you let this person go, who's like a killer and somebody who's destroying property, is that good in itself? No, it's not, right? Because you gotta, it's a balancing act, and you gotta weigh, right? What's more important? And if you let him go, right, it's momentary kindness, but it doesn't keep society safe, and that's the big deal, right? So, I mean, that's just one tricky part of like this idea of compassion. Now, there's lots of types of compassion, and again, compassion we just talked about, it's just like concern for others and misfortunes, right? So there's something called enthusiastic compassion. Whenever a tragedy strikes, do you guys ever notice how the second like an earthquake hits, typhoon, hurricane, etc., you see on TV, local news, and then what happens next? Somebody almost immediately opens a blood drive, clothing drive, food drive, and also like donation drive, right? That's what they call active compassion or enthusiastic compassion. You're actively working to help alleviate like immediate suffering of other people, right? And whenever they do ask for it, it's like, let's just say like a big fire has happened and people call for a blood drive, that hundreds of people show up, right? Why? And it's like you're giving your blood, like literally your own blood for these people. But again, it's part of like this fundamental expression of human nature. Like if somebody was dying in your family and they needed like a couple bottles of your blood, right? Or one of your brothers or sisters like tripped and like busted his knee or something and needed your blood, you wouldn't hesitate to give it. But it's also the same thing for strangers too, right? If there was a tragedy that struck and people needed blood, you guys would have no hesitation at doing so, okay? So that's like enthusiastic, like compassion. There's also like direct and indirect compassion. You could like help the needy with offering like your time, your energy, and even money, right? And that's part of like substantial and insubstantial donation, compassion too. Did you know that if you gave like small praises to somebody who like you see like, let's just say in the lunchroom or something by him or herself, and you give him or her a small praise, that's also a form of compassion, right? When I was growing up, especially in college, I remember there was a friend of mine, and another word for compassion would be like altruism. But there was this dude in college, right? He was a strange guy. He had a certain like psychological, almost like autism, where he couldn't like get along with other people. And I felt really compassionate for him, right? So I would try to like just have conversations with him. You know that, and you guys have seen that before, like certain outcasts in school or something. Like the ones that like can't make any friends. What do most people tend to do? They would point at them, they would say like, oh, that's an outcast, like, you know, and they'll all like, to some extent, like gang up on them and make fun of them. But if you are of a compassionate mind, right, you would say, okay, you don't have to like make fun of them, but you can also be like lend insubstantial type of compassion to them by saying, hey, how's your day? Just say hi, being nice in general to those types of people. It goes a long way, right? It's an act of compassion. And also, like, the idea of compassion is like, when you guys act without getting anything in return, right? So, like, no one's obligating you, no one's forcing you, because the second somebody's forcing you to do something, that's not compassion from yourself. But you shouldn't expect anything from return. For example, just yesterday, a teacher friend of mine, he had this like volunteer opportunity, and he had like 30 kids show up to do a soup kitchen, right? And that's great, because when you do a soup kitchen, you're basically like helping feeding people who are homeless, etc. But these kids aren't getting anything in return. They have to spend their Saturday from 7 a.m. to like 1 p.m. That's like 5 hours just helping other people out. That's great, right? Because you're like, I mean, you're alleviating the suffering of other people, but the goal is to hope to achieve to help people and not get anything else back, right? That's truly the core of compassion. And I don't know, to some extent, like you have to, but like I really like how like, well, I sit in the corner over there and there's like that donation box, right? And it's funny because I get to see, to some extent, I get to see like how much money people put in, like whether it's a little or a lot. And the people who put in like a lot of money, they don't necessarily announce it. They don't say like, hey everybody, I'm putting in $200 right here, notice me, right? They don't say anything. And that form of giving without like receiving any type of like notice, it's also like a really good form of compassion. You can do good deeds without being seen, right? Yeah, so that's the idea of compassion. So now I want to go to this idea of compassion. You can't just have compassion in this world. And back to this idea with the prison guard and the man who was like, committing murder and like, whether you should let him go or not. Compassion has to be balanced out with wisdom, okay? Otherwise, the analogy they make is that you're like a bird with one wing. Like think about which direction that bird goes in, or like a cart with just one wheel. How hard would it be to like walk a straight line towards a path, right? Here's one example, and I really like this example. Let's just say you're like a compassionate parent, or your parents is very compassionate, right? So every week, he's like, Mom or Dad, you give me like $100. And they're like, oh, yeah, sure, why not? I'll give you $100, right? And they start giving you $100. Can you think what would go wrong? If your parents gave you $100 a week, right? Every week. Let's just say, or if you ask for however much money and they give it to you. The thing that goes wrong is, and I've seen it with some kids that I observe, right? A, they can spend the money on the wrong thing. But B, it's like, if you're giving and you're not balancing it out, what happens to the mindsets of the people who are receiving the money? Like you guys, right? Then you would think, oh, money has no value. I didn't have to work so hard to get that money. And then you start spending it on bad stuff or silly stuff, right? And not understand the value of finance to begin with. So it's got to be balanced out. Let's just say maybe they gave you like $20 a week. That's a lot more balanced than $100 a week, right? So that's like an example of like giving, like being compassionate, but like being a little bit wise about being compassionate, right? Don't just give money freely, right? And also this goes to a larger issue. If you think like, oh, giving money makes you like gives you more merit or makes you compassionate, then that's the wrong idea. What if you gave your money, let's just say you're like a rich millionaire, right? And you gave your money to a lobby that sponsors guns, like that National Rifle Association. I mean, sure, you're being compassionate, you're giving money to an organization, but what if that organization does no good, right? So think about it. Like, you gotta, not only do you like want to generously donate your time, your energy, and your money, but you gotta be wise about where that money's going and how it's being spent, etc., okay? Okay, so there's a little story. There's a little story about, it's really nice too. It's about the story of these three priests, right? And the center priest, priest 1, 2, and 3, and the center priest is sitting in the center, right, next to the king. And it's like, the question is, why did this priest, or whatever, get such a high honor? Like, what was he known for? Well, there's a story of one day, these three priests were hiking through the mountains, and they stopped by a house. And they noticed that in this house, the woman who let them in was a widower, so her husband died, and she had 7 children. And so one of the priests told the other 2, hey, or monk, he's like, you guys go ahead, I'm gonna actually stay back and stay with this lady. And the other 2 monks were saying, this selfish dude, he wants to be with that widower because she doesn't have a husband. He's abandoning his studies to stay with this lady. And so these other 2 monks, they just like walk away. They're like shaking their heads, like, why is this guy just like, oh, he sees this woman by herself, so he's just taking advantage. Yeah. But here's what this guy said to the lady, right? He's like, hey, I'm gonna stay here, I'm gonna take care of your kids, right? But I don't think we should get married because your husband just died. So he suggested to the lady she should be in mourning for 3 years, okay? Okay, so the lady's like, okay, I'll be in mourning for 3 years, we won't get married, etc., etc. So at the end of those 3 years, the woman said to the guy, hey, mourning's done for 3 years, right? Let's get married. And the guy's like, actually, you just finished your mourning for your husband, now it's my time to mourn for your husband. So let's wait another 3 years. So after those 3 years are over, right? So another 3 years pass by. After those 3 years are over, the guy says, let's mourn for another 3 years, you and I both, for your husband, right? And so at the end of those 3 years, what happened? The kids have all grown up. And the guy's like, oh, now that your kids are all grown up, I can actually return back to my studies. So, that's a really kind of like a very interesting story of how this guy seems like he was like succumbing to his desires, but he was really being compassionate. He stayed with that lady to take care of the kids, and he waited 9 years for the kids to grow up, right? 3 years each time. And that's just like it's just like a very nice little story of like how this person was acting on compassion. This helps me transition to another story, right? And the big idea of this next story is that sometimes what seems like compassion isn't compassion, and what doesn't seem like compassion is compassion. Sounds like a tongue twister, but what does it say? Well, one time there was this monk, right? He sees this little pheasant, or it's like a little bird running around, and it goes underneath his robes. And then, 10 seconds later, there's a hunter with a gun running by, and he asks the monk, hey, have you seen this bird? I'm trying to hunt and kill it. And the monk's like, no, I didn't see anything. And then the hunter's like, okay, and he walks away. First off, if you guys remember the 5 precepts, one of the precepts is you shouldn't be lying, right? And here you have the monk lying. But what was it for? What was it out of? It was out of compassion for this little bird who was about to be killed by a hunter, right? deliberately like broke one of the precepts just so that he could save the bird, right? So it helps. It's like what didn't seem like an act of compassion is compassion. At the same time, there's another story of this dude. He bought a turtle, right, from the pet store, and he's like, hey, animals should not be put in cages, right? So guess what he decided to do with the turtle? He's like, I'm going to liberate you. So he takes the turtle, brings it to the pond, sets it down, and liberates the turtle. Seems like a good deal, right? No, not really. And here's the reason why. That turtle did not belong to that pond. It did not belong to the ecosystem there. And what the turtle ended up doing was it ate all the fish. It like killed all the fish, right? It's like a funny / sad story of like what seems like compassion wasn't actually compassion because he ended up like harming more than he was supposed to, right? So that's something that you gotta be careful of. Okay, so why is, and this is like getting towards like the closing statement of like why compassion? Why is compassion so important in Buddhism in general, right? It helps remedy a lot of things. Like if our idea of the 3 ideas of Buddhism is like avoid evil deeds, do good deeds, and stay on the path, right? And think about all the evil stuff that like Buddhism talks about: greed, ignorance, anger. If you had compassion, it's the number one technique that helps you fight off against greed, ignorance, and anger. And if you think carefully about it, for example, let's just say you're somebody who's greedy, right? If you develop this compassionate side, then you would realize that, hey, giving a little bit is actually very helpful. And it prevents you from being like greedy and wanting more stuff. Or even if you're like anger, usually a lot of like anger and hatred, right? Let's just say you have somebody that you extremely dislike, whether it's a kid, a teacher, an adult, or anybody in your life, right? And you have like this like weird hatred for them, like oddly weird. If you put yourself in their shoes, I wonder why. If you put yourself in their shoes and try to like use compassion and see like exactly how they would feel on a daily basis, then that level of hatred would actually disappear, right? No matter how they behave, you have to have a feeling of like sympathy for them, like, and then the second that you are able to be compassionate and feel that level of like pity and concern for their suffering, your hatred or your arrogance towards them is going to disappear, right? So the idea is that all of this, all of compassion is basically a guideline for you guys to do good, right? And it's a guideline for the achievement of Buddhahood as well. So all this idea of joy, gentleness, kindness, compassion, generosity, they're the things that you do if you continue on that path and exhibit that stuff, helps generate wisdom, right? And with more wisdom, guess what you're able to generate? More compassion, right? And those two go hand in hand. And ultimately, between wisdom and compassion, it helps you lead you towards a more like enlightened path, okay? So that's the end of this lecture. By the way, to build your compassion this summer, if you have free time, think about ways to volunteer, right? And help each other out, or help the temple out. The monk always has a million tasks for him to do. So if you guys have free time, ask around, be like, hey, I'm bored, how can I help out, right? And be more compassionate. If you can't donate money, you can donate your time, you can donate your energy, right? And hopefully those little acts help make you a lot more wiser and develop wisdom, okay? With that said, thank you for listening.
Mr. Announcement.
Oh yeah, there's not going to be, I'm not going to lecture for June or July, so I'm going to come back in August. So first 2 weeks of August, I'm going to start coming back, okay? Summer break.
Enjoy yourself.